Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today we have entered day 208 of the ongoing war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. We'll start coverage up in the north near the ongoing fighting that is taking place near Kupiansk. Again, we have received reports that Ukrainian forces have crossed the Oskal River. At the same time, we are continuing to receive reports of Russian forces still located in the town, putting up a very significant resistance inside of Kupiansk on the western bank of the Oskil River in this vicinity. So are these Russian forces trapped and surrounded by Ukrainian forces, or what is going on? But right now, we have a fairly convincing evidence right now that heavy fighting, is taking place still inside of Kupiansk, and in all probability, there are still Russian forces holding out, fighting in street-to-street fighting inside of Kupiansk. Let's go on down here and see the map where we can see the size of Kupiansk, and it has some built-up areas along the closer to the river area, some lower industrialized areas in Kupiansk. But for the most part, it's not a huge town. It does have urban areas. It does have some sprawling multi-level apartment blocks, as you can see there. And we do believe at this point Russian forces are still inside of the city attempting to put up resistance. We also believe that there are elements of the Russian First Guards Tank Army on the eastern bank of the Oskil River that are possibly preparing defensive operations and maybe counter-offensive operations within the vicinity on the western bank of the Oskil River. Further to the south, near Severodonetsk and Lyman, there are reported units of the 90th Guards Tank Division also accumulating in this area as we speak. Heavy fighting continues outside of Lysychansk and in the forested regions directly to the west of Lysychansk and Severodonetsk. We anticipate this could be a series of bloody battles that are going to take place on the western bank near and inside of Lysychansk as this fighting continues. But right now, it does look like the Russians have stabilized their lines just to the west of Lysychansk as we're continuing to watch this very closely. There continues to be fighting near Donetsk and other areas, both to the north near Holovika and to the south as well. There was a reported column, probably a company-sized column, that was attacked. A Ukrainian column made up of armored infantry fighting vehicles and a few tanks that was attacked by Russian Su-25 Frogfoots just on the western bank of the Dnieper River, west of the line of contact and within the vicinity of Mykolaiv, in the general direction of this ongoing Ukrainian operation to reclaim control of the western bank of the Dnieper River. We have heard reports of additional units of the Ukrainian army attempting a buildup in this area, possibly for a renewed push in order to get those Russian forces that are still in this area to capitulate. And that's probably why we're seeing the Russian Air Force become more active in this area. At the same time, the Ukrainians are reporting that they've shot down 4 Russian aircraft over the course of the last 24 to 48 hours, which brings to total the roughly confirmed now 55 Russian actual combat jets that have been shot down. This does not include drones nor helicopters, but actual fixed-wing tactical air assets. And obviously, the Russians are looking to continue the use of its fixed-wing air advantage against Ukrainian forces. Again, though, as we look at the Russian Air Force, I would have to say it has performed rather unremarkably. I mean, I think going into this this war that many analysts would have assumed, especially given some of the terrain that we're looking at. It's not like the Russians are engaging ground targets in hilly, forested areas. A lot of this territory is wide open farm fields. And yeah, there are some definite urban built-up areas, but the terrain is very much conducive to what the Russians possess in terms of fixed-wing aircraft and helicopter gunships. If we kind of zoom in and we kind of look at the environment, I mean, yeah, there is some forested areas and what have you, but for the most part, it's an environment that the Russian Air Force should excel at, and should be. Again, as we had anticipated going into this war, that Russian interdiction efforts would prevent Ukrainian forces from reinforcing the eastern bank of the Dnieper River. And we haven't really seen that. We haven't seen Russian forces preventing the Ukrainians from reinforcing, much less conducting large-scale offensive operations near Kharkov, way to the northeast of the theater of operations. And again, as I had talked about, in the early stages of this conflict, if the Russians were looking to seize control of the eastern bank of the Dnieper River, I would have assumed, and assumed incorrectly, that the Russians would have had the capability to interdict Ukrainian forces as they try to cross the several dozen bridges, or not even several dozen, maybe a dozen bridges that cross the Dnieper River. And we just assumed that the Russian forces would focus on those crossing points, railway networks, and prevent the Ukrainians from supplying its forces, especially in this area where they just launched this massive counteroffensive. We could see the Ukrainians massing forces on the western bank of the Dnieper River. We know that the air defense assets that the Ukrainians had in this area near Mykolaiv, Odessa, Kryvyi Rih were better, or are better, than what they had in the east, especially on the eastern bank of the Dnieper River. But the Ukrainian attack occurred here. So very, very interesting as we continue to dissect and analyze this conflict. A lot of surprises, a lot of misconceptions going into this war. But that's where we sit right now. We will, of course, continue to monitor, report, and always, thanks for joining us today. Have a good day.